In the first 16 days after the release of Stranger Things, it was watched by 8.2 million people. So how did two brothers from North Carolina not only take over Hollywood, but change the industry of TV as we know it today? And why was it they planned on scrapping the entire cast after just one season? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Montgomery and welcome to Bloody Good. Today we're looking at the first season of Stranger Things and just how it was made, as well as what was different from the initial pitch to the final product and what that meant in terms of the initial casting choices they had going into it, and characters that was outright scrapped from the final show. Matt and Ross Duffer grew up in North Carolina in 1984, far away from the Hollywood showbiz or the art house scene that was in New York City. When reflecting on their childhood, Matt had this to say: "We grew up in the suburbs of Durham, kind of in the middle of nowhere, by a tobacco farm. We had woods and creeks, tobacco fields, train tracks. It was beautiful." As identical twins, they obviously shared a lot in common. From an early age, they recognised they were both extremely passionate about movies. Growing up in the golden age of the VHS home release, they watched anything they could get their hands on. Notable films like Tim Burton's Batman or even Disney classics such as Dumbo. On the Christmas of 1993, they received a gift that would change not only their lives forever, but the future of televisions: a HI9 camcorder. Every summer, as soon as we got off from school, we would start brainstorming the next movie to make, and we would spend all summer making it. We never went to camp. We just stuck around the neighborhood and wandered around and made these movies. At around the age of 10 years old, they made their very first feature-length movie, based on a certain card game sweeping the nation.
They shuffle like ordinary cards, but if you've never played Magic: The Gathering, then the deck is definitely stacked against you.
Their love for filmmaking grew and grew, and they continued to make films with their friends and even shooting documentaries about their high school theatre production. However, they soon realised that in order to make movies, they had to go where they were really made. And in 2004, at the age of 20, they did just that, moving to California, enrolling in a film college, and cutting their teeth filming and editing short films. When reflecting on their early education, Matt had this to say: "The teachers found out I love making movies, and they were very encouraging. People said, 'You can do whatever you want to do.' No one told us how difficult it was going to be." And difficult it was, even after making a handful of successful shorts that gained them small amounts of notoriety, and even an early mentorship under Mace Neufeld, the producer of Red October. They found nothing quite came for them, and they had to rethink their plan. They realised making endless shorts wasn't going to be their ticket into Hollywood they initially thought. After leaving college, it took the brothers over 5 years to make any money doing anything remotely creative. Now, this didn't mean they weren't pitching. They were going into boardrooms and pitching idea after idea, but they often recalled going in there with executives who looked tired and bored, and who had already made up their mind before the brothers had even had a chance to open their mouths. Feeling defeated and running out of money, they found inspiration in a film that came out called Monsters, directed by at the time, unknown director Gareth Edwards. Yes, that's Gareth Edwards. The film ended up being a smash success, and flipped a light switch on for the brothers after they watched it. What are we doing with our lives? We're running around trying to pitch movie ideas that we don't even like. And here's a guy who just goes out and makes something on his own that he's clearly passionate about. And he makes it on the cheap. Why aren't we doing that? But time was ticking for the brothers. They started writing their script, Hidden, post-apocalyptic horror film. And the brothers knew that if this didn't sell, they'd be getting jobs at Starbucks to pay the rent. Luckily for the brothers, the script was popular. So popular, in fact, it started a bidding war and eventually landed at the feet of Warner Brothers, where the brothers were also brought on to direct the film. However, it didn't turn out exactly like they planned. Instead of getting a cinema release, the film was instead put on home release and received mixed reviews at best. This left the brothers feeling defeated, with Matt saying, "You're banging on the door for years, and they finally let you in the party, and then they're like, 'That was an accident. You don't actually belong here. Get the fuck out.' Your dreams come true, and then they don't." However, when one door closes, another one opens, and the film caught the attention of one M. Night Shyamalan, making his first foray into television with his show Wayward Pines. He was so impressed by the film, he brought the boys on as writers and producers for the show, and gave them their first real taste for working in television. With the show now finished, the boys had a newfound sense of confidence in their creative abilities and had a real taste for television. And after being inspired by the film Prisoners, a film that follows a father desperately trying to find his missing child, they started working on their own TV show with a similar premise. They started working on Montauk. The brothers loved Prisoners but wanted something with a bit more of an adventurous spirit, so they took inspiration from real-life events and conspiracy theories, such as Area 51, the Philadelphia experiment, and MK Ultra, a real-life event where the US government attempted to discover mind control during the Cold War. And this is what served as the inspiration to set the show in the 80s, just like the films they grew up watching on VHS, all the way back in North Carolina. In finding the show's identity, they had to change certain elements from the page to the screen, as I'm sure you're familiar with if you've seen our other series comparing just that. The original title for the show, Montauk, was named after the town it was set in, which was changed to Hawkins, and the show, of course, being renamed Stranger Things. The pitch for the show itself was for a limited series that lasted just one season, with a very different idea of what to do with the show if it got renewed for a second season, but we'll get onto that later. Now, much of the original plot of the show stays very similar to the original pitch deck, bar some changes to the characters, such as Mike Wheeler was originally planned to have a birthmark on his left cheek, which led to bullying. Lucas's parents were in the process of a messy divorce, affecting Lucas and resulting in anger issues. Dustin was originally going to have a father present in his life and sport oversized glasses. And Eleven would gain her powers not through experimentation on her mother, but through genetic mutation from her mother's personal drug use. She would later be kidnapped at 2 years old instead of from birth. And most interestingly, Steve Harrington, now a fan favourite, is nothing more than a footnote in the description of Nancy Wheeler. Hopper stays as the chief of police with a devastating backstory, but with a car crash resulting in the loss of his daughter, instead of a tragic sickness caused by his time working with chemicals in the military. Now, Mr. Clark is our second most stark in contrast to the original pitch to what we got. Now, in the original pitch deck, he's presented as a rock star of the local middle school, described as charismatic, charming, handsome, and whip smart. He's even referenced as the series' closest thing to Indiana Jones and was planned to be a key character in solving the mystery and helping the gang in the third act enter the Upside Down. Now, this is obviously very different than the Mr. Clark we got in the show, and don't get me wrong, I do love Mr. Clark. Just wow. Now, Terry Ives was a major character that was sort of cut from the show. Terry Ives worked in the local cinema as a projectionist operator. He was branded a conspiracy nut and had, quote, the appearance of a serial killer with balding hair and rounded glasses. In the pitch, he would have been keeping tabs on the government's dealings in the small town for over 10 years and would be a crucial character to help the gang in the third act. Now, obviously, this character doesn't exist in the final show. Well, sort of does. The name was then given to Eleven's mother in the show, as a sort of way to pay tribute to the character they lost along the way. In late 2014, Dan Cohen, the vice president of 21 Laps Entertainment, brought the script to the eyes of Sean Levy, telling him, "It's by these twin brothers no one's ever heard of, and it may be the best pilot I've ever read." Now, not only did Sean Levy fall in love with the pilot script, he worked with brothers to improve their pitch and get them in the room with Netflix, who, after pitching, called him in less than 24 hours and ordered the entire first season. Now, with the show greenlit, the audition process was a gauntlet, auditioning over 900 boys for the various roles in the show and over 300 girls for the role of 11. The brothers knew how important the casting for the children was, saying, "Everyone recognized really early on that if we had even one kid who wasn't good, it would take down the whole ship." Carmen Cuba was the casting director who led the charge in finding the children. For finding the role of Will, they needed someone who was young and innocent, but also kept people engaged, and this is where they found Noah Schnapp. When casting Millie Bobby Brown for the role of 11, Millie was so dedicated that she kept up an American accent for the whole process. Finn Wolfhard, who went on to play the titular role of Mike, was sick while auditioning and sent in a self-tape from his bed. And even through the flu and sickness, the team recognised the passion and energy he had for the role. When looking for the actor for Lucas, they found Caleb McLaughlin. The casting team were enamoured with not only his experience on Broadway, but also his ability to build quick relationships with his co-stars. Gaten Matarazzo's audition fundamentally changed the character of Dustin based on what he brought to the audition. What he brought to the character was not what we imagined, and it also made us realise that we didn't even have any idea of what it could be until we met him. When looking to cast the two main adults for the series, the brothers attempted to leverage the idea of it being a limited series to cast big name actors. For Hopper, they originally wanted someone along the lines of Ewan McGregor or Sam Rockwell, and for Joyce they were looking for someone like Naomi Watts or Marissa Tomei. When casting for the role of Joyce, it was once again the forward-thinking mind of Carmen Cuba who suggested Winona Ryder for the role. The brothers were hesitant when it came to bringing the role to Winona Ryder. Not only had she never done TV before, but the brothers were fans. This was someone they grew up watching on the VHS they rented all the way back at home. She was one of those actors we all grew up watching and that we all loved and had so much nostalgia for, and I missed her on screen. We were all worried whether she would agree to do television. Ross and I had one movie that was not even released by Warner Brothers, so it's not like we were a hot commodity. After being convinced, the brothers did everything in their power to convince her to take the role. They sent her pictures, they sent her scripts, they sent her fake trailers edited to give a sense of the mood, and after a 4.5-hour meeting with her, she accepted the role. To find an actor for the role of Hopper, they needed an actor who would bring a special quality to the role. They were holding auditions in New York City. David Harbour walked in, said his lines, and left. Carmen picked up her phone and texted just 5 words to the brothers. Watch David Harbour right now. Upon watching it, the brothers knew immediately they had landed the role of their reluctant hero. The very first scene they shot was the Dungeons and Dragons scene, as they knew if the kids couldn't work together, the whole show would come crumbling down. Luckily for them, the scene was successful, and they knew they had a hit on their hands. The brothers aimed to push the bar with what could be done on television, using a mix of practical effects and CGI. And when filming was finished and post-production was over, the series was shown internally to Netflix executives, who immediately greenlit a season 2 of the show. Now, according to reports, when the show was released within the first 14 days, it had been watched by 8.2 million Netflix accounts. This put it ahead of House of Cards, Daredevil, and Narcos on the streaming service. Now, with the success of Stranger Things, the second season had to be changed drastically from what the initial pitch was. Initially, the pitch for the second season would have seen us joining up with the kids 10 years later, as grown adults, some of which had moved away from their small town. Being set now in the 1990s, the kids were grown up, had jobs and families. However, the evil had come back and forced them all to return to their small town to vanquish this evil one more time. I think this would be an interesting story, but also feels very similar to Stephen King's It. And I think it's quite ironic now, with the final season coming out, actually coming out a real 10 years later than the first season. Thank you so much for watching. We really enjoy making these videos for you. If you're interested in how adaptations can change from the page to the screen, we have a whole series on that featuring 2 Stephen King books. And if you're more of just a classic horror fan, why not check out our series where we compare the original and remake of some amazing classic horror movies. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.